Imagine Istanbul in the spring of 1534. The air is alive with the scent of tulips and incense. The Bosphorus shimmers under a soft sun. But inside the famed Topkapi Palace, the silence is heavy with anticipation. A whisper has ignited the harem, a rumor so scandalous it could shatter an empire. The Sultan is going to marry his favorite. For centuries, this was unthinkable. Ottoman law was clear. A sultan did not marry his concubines. They were his companions, the mothers of his children, but never his wives. The sultan belonged to the empire, and the empire alone. But Sultan Suleiman, known as the lawgiver, the conqueror, the shadow of God on earth, was about to defy history itself, and he was doing it for one woman, Hürrem. She had arrived years before as a slave, captured from the war-torn frontiers of Ruthenia, and brought to Istanbul in chains. But the girl who entered the harem as a captive refused to remain one. Her laughter, bold and disarming, echoed through halls accustomed to quiet deference. Her intelligence, her wit, her irresistible charm methodically dismantled the palace hierarchy. She climbed invisible ladders, outshining every rival, and achieved the impossible. She captured not just the Sultan's attention, but his heart. On that fateful morning, the harem was a whirlwind of activity. Attendants dressed Hürrem in silks from Damascus, their gold threads shimmering like sunlight on snow, the air filled with the scent of jasmine oil as they fastened priceless jewels to her wrists, their movements a mix of awe and unspoken envy. Outside the palace walls, the court was in chaos. Viziers debated in hushed, anxious tones. Foreign ambassadors scribbled frantic letters trying to explain the inexplicable. The Venetian envoy would later write that the Sultan has taken to wife his slave girl contrary to the custom of all his ancestors. It was a scandal. It was heresy. It was history being rewritten before their very eyes. Hürrem's wedding wasn't just a love story. It was a political earthquake. It was Suleiman's declaration that he ruled not by the ghosts of tradition, but by his own heart. The palace craftsmen worked day and night, creating gifts worthy of a queen. Ruby-studded belts, pearls the size of grapes, and ivory boxes filled with exotic perfumes. As evening fell, the palace transformed into a realm of pure fantasy. Thousands of oil lamps illuminated the courtyards, their flames dancing in the fountains filled with rose petals. Musicians played melodies that felt like the empire's own heartbeat. Then, she emerged. Veiled in crimson silk and escorted by lantern-bearers, Hürrem moved with a slow, ceremonial grace. As she entered the imperial hall, every whisper died. There, beneath an arch of gold filigree, stood Suleiman. He was dressed in white brocade, his turban crowned with emeralds. But the look on his face wasn't that of a mighty ruler. It was the look of a man, vulnerable and uncertain. When their eyes met, the world seemed to hold its breath. The imam recited the sacred vows, witnesses signed the imperial decree, and when Suleiman placed a ring on Hürrem's finger, centuries of tradition shattered. The girl once known as Roxolana, the captive from a distant land, was now Haseki Hurrem Sultan, the legal wife of the most powerful man on earth. The celebration that followed was legendary. Cannons boomed from the harbor, drums thundered across the city's 7 hills, and poets sang her praises, calling her the son of the dynasty. But amid the splendor, a quiet unease settled. Mahidevran, Suleiman's former consort and the mother of his eldest son, retreated into a bitter silence. The women of the harem knew that the rules of their world had been irrevocably changed. Hürrem had not just won a husband, she had redrawn the very map of power. Later, Hürrem stepped onto a balcony overlooking the Bosphorus. The cool night air carried the scent of sea salt and roses. She looked out at the glittering minarets of the city she had conquered, a quiet, unreadable smile on her face. She knew what she had gained, and she understood the immense price she would have to pay to keep it. In her reflection on the dark water, she saw not just a bride, but a queen standing between destiny and defiance. The bridal procession to the Sultan's chamber was a dreamlike spectacle. Lamps floated on pools scattered with petals, and the scent of musk and sandalwood followed her every step. Inside, surrounded by flickering torchlight and shimmering silks, Suleiman waited. He offered her his hand and she took it. steady, fearless, and ready. The morning after, the court awoke to a new reality. Hurrem's apartments were moved next to the Sultan's. She began receiving petitions advising on state affairs and corresponding with foreign kings and queens. The invisible wall between concubine and sovereign had been torn down. For every smile she received in the corridors, she knew there was a whisper behind a closed door. But Hürrem had learned a vital lesson. Power, once seized, must never be allowed to tremble. Years later, poets would still write of that magical night when the lamps of Topkapi Palace burned until dawn, when a slave became a queen. But her true legacy wasn't written in verse. It was built in stone and ink, in the mosques, schools, and charities she founded, and in the letters that reveal her sharp political mind. That night was not just a wedding. It was the birth of a new era, one where the subtle, unyielding power of a woman's will could reshape an empire. Centuries later, we still tell her story, returning to that moment when a captive in crimson silk walked through the gates of history and never looked back. Thank you for watching. If you were captivated by the story of Hurrem Sultan, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales of history's most extraordinary figures. See you next time.